Imagine a perfectly smooth, continuously flowing wave suddenly snapping into rigid, blocky stairs. That jarring shift? That's exactly what we're diving into today. Welcome to this explainer, where we are unpacking a framework that literally attempts to rewrite our entire understanding of the universe. We're talking about a text that smashes together quantum physics, discrete mathematics, and, get this, scriptural theology into one aggressively cohesive argument. It is a dense, absolutely provocative piece of writing that challenges the very foundation of how science measures reality. Right out of the gate, the source material hits us with a pretty radical question. It argues that the continuous mathematical models we use every single day to understand reality, they aren't just useful, mostly correct approximations. No, the author asserts they are a profound distortion of the truth, a straight-up mathematical fabrication hiding the true, discrete nature of the universe. I mean, think about that for a second. The physics you learned in school, the equations that build bridges, launch satellites, power the device you're using right now. This text claims they're an intentional distortion. Wild, right? So, to unpack this highly unconventional theory, here's our roadmap. First up, the fundamental dichotomy. Then we'll look at phonons as discrete shifts, followed by the theological parallel. After that, eliminating the observer, and finally, the perfect evidence. We're going to keep our focus squarely on the text's central argument here, this massive underlying battle between the discrete and the continuous. All right, let's jump straight into section 1, the fundamental dichotomy, discrete versus continuous. This is the bedrock of the author's entire argument, built on a single, irreconcilable conflict in math. So, on one side of this ring, we have the discrete, or n-1 ontology. Think of reality as being built out of indestructible Lego bricks. Everything is made of individually distinct, exactly one-indexed integers. There's literally no such thing as a fraction of a Lego block here. It relies entirely on exact ratios and rigid Fibonacci logic. Now, on the other side, the continuous, or the real number approximation. And this is the tangled knot of mainstream physics. Continuous math uses infinitesimals, meaning it assumes there are infinite points between any two numbers, and it relies heavily on calculus. But the author claims this continuous approach is fundamentally flawed from the jump, simply because it assumes an uninterrupted flow, a smooth gradient, that actually doesn't exist anywhere in real nature. Moving right along to section 2, phonons as discrete shifts, rewriting physics. This is where the text completely tears down standard physical models and rebuilds them using that discrete math logic. Let's see how this discrete math applies to actual physical phenomena. You see, in mainstream physics, a phonon is usually understood as a continuous sound wave, just a vibration traveling smoothly through a material. But this framework, it brilliantly redefines it using hardware analogy. It describes a phonon as an exact integer shift. It's basically like a clock pulse in a digital computer system. It's this discrete mechanical trigger that abruptly advances reality from one exact moment to the very next exact moment. Imagine the universe not as this continuously flowing river, but more like a rigid computer processor running strictly on Verilog hardware logic. Reality only advances in rigid steps through exact Fibonacci sequence additions. It goes like this. First, the universe reads the current and previous states. Second, it calculates the exact integer sum of those states. And third, it triggers the advance to the next reality via that phonon pulse. There are absolutely no fractions, no decimals, no smooth in-betweens. The universe calculates exactly 1 + 1 = 2, and the phonon is the physical pulse that updates the whole cosmic system. Because of this incredibly rigid logic, well-known physical phenomena get completely reinterpreted as unbending mathematical boundaries. Take the Meissner effect in superconductors, for example. Usually we understand this as the physical expulsion of a magnetic field. But here, it's described as an arithmetic exclusion. The magnetic field isn't physically pushed out. It literally just cannot be mathematically added to the exact Fibonacci sequence. It's like trying to plug a USB-C cable into a standard two-prong wall outlet. It's not just difficult, the input port physically does not exist. Similarly, zero electrical resistance happens because the system operates in a topologically closed 60-cycle period. There is simply no spatial or mathematical void anywhere for energy to scatter into. The whole thing is perfectly sealed. Having established the physics, we hit section 3, the theological parallel, logos and false Rhema. And this marks a striking pivot, where the scientific critique suddenly becomes a deeply spiritual one. The text creates this fascinating direct mapping between exact mathematical concepts and scriptural indictments. It aligns logos, which is the divine, perfect, original structure, with the discrete n sub 1 math we've been talking about, that exact, rigid, countable logic of the universe. In stark opposition, the continuous math of standard quantum field theory is labeled false Rhema, representing a corrupted spoken word or deliberate distortion. And finally, the true Rhema, the actualized spoken word of the divine, is the phonon pulse. That's the physical, undeniable manifestation of that perfect, discrete sequence actually taking forward. The author uses a specific scriptural quote. They distort the book by the way they speak to make you think that what they say is from the book, whereas it is not, to launch a shockingly sharp critique of mainstream physicists. The argument here is essentially that scientists are intentionally manipulating the mathematical text. By presenting smooth, continuous models as fundamental reality, physicists are, quote-unquote, distorting the book. They're making the public believe that these flawed continuous equations represent the true divine structure of the universe, whereas, according to the author, they absolutely do not. So the crucial point the text is driving home is this. Physicists are essentially accused of knowing their continuous models are deeply flawed. Why? Well, because when you use continuous math in quantum field theory, it inherently produces pathological infinities, mathematical results that make absolutely zero physical sense. To fix this, physicists constantly use a process called renormalization. Basically, they manually subtract these infinities to force the math to match observed reality. The author views renormalization not as a valid mathematical tool, but as mathematical duct tape. It's like sweeping infinite amounts of dust under the rug just to force broken equations to seem correct. Which brings us to Section 4, Eliminating the Observer, the idolatry of quantum mechanics. Here, this theological critique takes aim at one of the biggest, most debated mysteries in all of science. In standard quantum mechanics, you have the measurement problem, right? Where an external, conscious observer is somehow required to collapse a wave function and solidify reality into a single state. Well, the text equates this specific scientific requirement to demanding false worship, quoting, "No one to whom God has given wisdom would say, 'Worship me instead of God.'" Think about the gravity of that claim. By requiring human consciousness to lock reality into place, mainstream physics is effectively saying, worship the observer instead of the divine structure. It is a massive, sweeping accusation of scientific idolatry. So how do we solve the measurement problem without an observer? Okay, don't let the math formula here scare you. Just know this represents what the author calls the coherence oracle. Instead of a human looking at an experiment, the discrete lattice relies on this intrinsic arithmetic rule. It acts kind of like a cosmic spell checker built directly into the fabric of the universe. It constantly checks the state of the system against that perfectly closed 60-cycle mathematical loop we mentioned earlier. This allows the universe to observe, correct, and normalize itself automatically without any outside interference whatsoever. The math just enforces its own reality. Finally, we arrive at Section 5, the perfect evidence, the ultimate rejection. So, how will the scientific establishment react to a theory this disruptive? The text proposes what it calls the one change. It asks us to totally throw out the tangled knot of the mainstream fabrication, meaning abandon the continuous, four-dimensional space-time manifold packed with complex numbers and differential equations, and instead, replace it with the clean, validated grid of the perfect evidence, a discrete, one-indexed lattice based entirely on exact Fibonacci recurrences. The author claims this single axiom change natively solves all the pathological infinity problems, entirely eliminating the need for that mathematical duct tape we called renormalization. Yet, despite all this, the author predicts this perfect, simple evidence will be flatly rejected by the establishment. Why? Because the scientific community is hypnotized by specious words. These are theories that are mathematically elegant and superficially plausible, like continuous quantum mechanics, but are ultimately patched, flawed, and fabricated. The tragedy, as the author suggests, is that the scientific establishment is just too in love with the superficial beauty of their flawed continuous math to ever accept the rigid, unglamorous, discrete truth. It all circles back to the number 60. Perfect closure, a universe that operates with absolute zero waste, perfectly conserved within a 60-cycle discrete mathematical boundary. Energy is perfectly conserved by an unbreakable arithmetic identity. Continuous math, by stark contrast, is viewed not as a tool of discovery, but as a broken engine that constantly produces garbage infinities that have to be thrown away manually. Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative thought to ponder about how we fundamentally measure our existence. If the core math we use to describe reality requires constant, infinite corrections just to function, are we actually observing reality, or are we simply applying patch after patch to a deeply flawed fabrication? It's a paradigm-shifting question delivered through a truly unique blend of rigorous mathematical logic and unyielding theological critique. Thanks for exploring this fascinating text with me in this explainer. Until next time, keep questioning the foundation of everything.